Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 204 of CryptoBiography, and it's part 2 of Snake Magic. And I'm really enjoying writing this. I hope you're enjoying listening to it, and here we go. When she came back with a second urn of water, Caedmon's apprentices, Garrick and Thorn, were there at the far side of the kitchen, looking over the room as though they were the overseers, which they certainly weren't. Still, as Mr. Caedmon's apprentices, they were hardly without authority, even if it was indirect. When they came to the kitchen, the staff usually did their best to pretend they weren't there and hoped that they didn't stir up too much mischief. Garrick was the older of them, though he was still a youth. He had dirty blonde hair that he kept short. He was stocky and fairly tall. He had a pug nose and a strong jaw, which always seemed at odds to Neidre, since the small upturned nose reminded her of a baby's, while the strong jaw was that of a grown man. His eyes were sharp and always looking for something to give him an edge. Thorn was younger but taller than Garrick, despite Garrick's height. He was also thin as a rail. The gossip around the estate had it that Thorn was not a terribly good magician and was making slow progress. However, it was also known that his family was wealthy and powerful, and he was unlikely to be booted out by Caedmon anytime soon. No one seemed to know much about Garrick's family. Some even speculated he was an orphan. He certainly wasn't known to be from power or wealth. Perhaps because of this, because he had nothing to fall back on, Garrick studied well and learned his magic. Still, he found plenty of time to boss around the demi-humans of the estate. Though everyone respected his prowess, no one liked him among the servants. So he was always with Thorn, which made sense since they were often supposed to study together, but also gave them a sense of shared power. Alone, either of them were fairly reasonable humans to deal with, but together they tended to egg each other on, making anyone in their path miserable. Thus, the kitchen staff were all avoiding looking at the pair of them when Neidre slithered in. Right when she looked across and saw it was them, they saw her. She looked away, but too late. She was pouring her urn into the large pot when they sauntered over to her. "Hey, Slimy." She wasn't looking, but it was Garrick's voice. His was the lower of the two, always slightly raspy. Neidre didn't respond. Snakes aren't slimy, she thought, and neither am I. "He's talking to you, snake girl," Thorn said. "What do you want?" Neidre asked without looking at them. She was pouring the water slowly, as she didn't know what they wanted or what her next move should be. "You," Garrick said. Neidre watched the last of the water tip out of the urn. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Come with us," Garrick said. He turned on his heel and marched across the kitchen and into the interior of the estate house. Neidre followed, feeling nervous. She couldn't think of anything she had done that would get her in trouble, but sometimes trouble would find her anyway. The boys, as they were called by everyone on the estate whenever they weren't in earshot, loved to throw their weight around. Were they going to punish her for some alleged misdeed? Or were they going to do another favor of theirs and play some prank on her? Garrick walked fast, forcing her to slither along at a quick pace. He didn't look behind him. Thorn was behind her, and when she glanced back, she saw him making an odd half-smile that she couldn't read. Garrick wasn't going inside the estate house at all. He kept on marching until he had exited and gone into the front garden. He veered off and went down to the trees along the left side. Neidre saw Sorcerer Caedmon and his tow-headed son Blake, 5 years old. They were looking up into the tree next to them. Neidre looked up and saw what they were looking at. The boy's kite was tangled in the tree, and the boy must have tried to yank it free because the line had snapped far up and nothing was hanging down. Sorcerer Caedmon looked at her. "Get it down," he commanded. Neidre wondered briefly if Caedmon didn't have some magic that would get it down, but it didn't matter if he did. He had asked, so she would have to do it. The humans had sometimes asked her to climb various things. A lot of the time it was to see the very strange, to them, way that she climbed, mostly using the serpent part of her body. More recently, she suspected that some of them were trying to look up her dress, which is why her latest one was so modest. But this seemed to be a genuine request, and even if not, she could hardly refuse. "Please stand back a ways," she asked them all. "I need some room, and also, the way I climb is likely to knock small branches and twigs down on your heads if you're below." They all stepped back. Neidre sized the tree up. Like the others around the perimeter of the front garden, it was an oak. There were climbable branches, but not at a height a human could grab one. She got up close to the tree and grabbed the trunk with both hands, though that was hardly necessary. Her coils wrapped around the trunk, and then she had all the purchase she needed on the bark. She undulated a bit of her body up along her length and slowly made her way up the tree. She grabbed the branches to make it a bit easier, and once her body was on the branches, she could move almost as well as if she were on the ground. She heard some oohs from the ground, which sounded like Blake. Then she got out to the kite, which fortunately was within reach of one of the sturdier branches. She picked it off the twigs and coiled the twine in her hand. Then, just for fun, and after making sure no one was beneath her, she just let her body slide off the branches and hang down loose. Soon she got her upper body off the branch and hung on by one hand, kite in the other. Her body and her tail dangled straight down. It was a lot of weight, and she couldn't hold it for long, but she didn't need to. The tip of her tail was a foot or so from the ground like this. She twisted her tail so it would angle the safest way and let go. Her tail coiled beneath her, cushioned by the powerful muscles and flexible structures it housed. She relaxed into a normal position and smiled, then moved to Blake, who seemed a little intimidated by her, but accepted the kite. Without a word, let alone a thank you, Sorcerer Caedmon, his son, and his 2 apprentices turned and walked back towards the house. Knowing that without them escorting her, she was not welcome to go through the house, Neidre slithered around the side of the building and back to the kitchen area and resumed her work. As the months passed, the apprentices grew ever bolder in their ill treatment of the demi-humans on the estate. They would go into the gleaning room and disrupt them, slowing down their work, even though they knew that the Canids would be punished if they didn't complete enough orbs. Neidre noticed that Garrick was almost always the one starting the trouble, with Thorn simply along for the ride. Once, when the largest overseer, Matthew, well-muscled and always sweaty, was beating Martha for allowing some of the groceries to spoil, Neidre saw Garrick and Thorn watching her, and listening to her squeal. Garrick seemed to be enjoying it. Thorn, after a moment, turned and left the kitchen. Neidre, who almost as soon as it started had quietly left to get water, and slowly, so she would no longer have to see her friend being hurt, caught his eye as he walked by. "Thorn?" He stopped and looked at her. His face was impassive. He seemed to be deciding if he should scold her for talking to her without permission. "Yes." "Why do you follow Garrick around?" Thorn shrugged. "Is there anything you can do to keep him from picking on the Canids and everyone else?" Thorn shrugged again. "Okay, never mind then. Good day," she said, acting polite to keep her real feelings from costing her. She hoisted the urn and moved back into the kitchen. The sounds of the beatings had stopped, and Matthew had left the kitchen. Martha was sobbing in the corner alone. Neidre poured out the water from the urn into the big pot and set it aside. Then she went over to comfort her. And that's the story for this week. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm certainly enjoying writing it. It's, to me, a very fun world to write about, and a lot of interesting and a few sort of dark themes already sort of cropping in. And I'm enjoying the whole process, so thank you for listening. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music, copyright 2021, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.